What's the main difference between people who achieve and those who are average? What makes achievers excel? Why do some people skyrocket while others plummet? You can call it luck, blessing, or the Midas touch. But the truth is that some people just seem to achieve incredible things in spite of great difficulties. It doesn't matter what kind of work they do, wherever they are, they just seem to make things happen. Certainly all people like to think of themselves as above average, but achievers seem to leave average in the dust. But what makes the difference? Why do some people achieve so much? Is it family background? Having a good family growing up is not necessarily a good indicator of achievement. High percentages of successful people come from broken homes. Is it wealth? No. Some of the greatest achievers come from households of average to below average means. Is it opportunity? Two people with similar gifts, talents, and resources can look at a situation and one person will see a tremendous opportunity while the others see nothing. Opportunity is in the eye of the beholder. Is it high morals? I wish that were the key, but it's not. I've known people with high integrity who achieve little, and I've known scoundrels who are high producers. Is it the absence of hardship? For every achiever who has avoided tragedy, there's a Helen Keller who overcame extreme disabilities or a Viktor Frankl who survived absolute horrors. So that's not it either. None of those is the key. When it comes right down to it, I know of only one factor that separates those who consistently shine from those who don't. The difference between average people and achieving people is their perception of and response to failure. Throughout our time together, I want you to continually think of what I have just shared with you. In fact, I want to repeat it again, because it's the most important statement in the entire book. The difference between average people and achieving people is their perception of and response to failure. Nothing else has the same kind of impact on people's ability to accomplish their desires. How people see failure and deal with it impacts every aspect of their lives. Yet that ability seems difficult to acquire. Most people don't know where to start looking to get it. I haven't always been good at failing forward. It's certainly not something they tried to teach me in school. Take a look at some of my previous attitudes toward failure and see if your experience was similar. First, I feared failure. On the first day of class, when I was a college freshman, one professor walked in and boldly declared, "Half of you in this room will not pass this class." What was my first response? Fear. Up to that time, I'd never failed a class, and I certainly did not want to start. So the first question I asked myself was, what does the professor want? School became a game that I wanted to win. Second, I misunderstood failure. As a child, I thought failure was a percentage. 69 and lower was failure, 70 and above was success. But failure isn't a percentage or a test. It's not a single event. It is a process. Third, I was unprepared for failure. When I graduated from college with my bachelor's degree, I wasn't at all prepared for what was ahead of me. I found that out in my first job. As the pastor in a small rural church, I did everything the people might expect of me and then some. But to be honest, I was as concerned about getting everyone to like me as I was with helping people. In the type of church I led, each year the people vote to decide whether to allow the leader to keep his job. And the leaders I had met loved to brag about the unanimous affirming votes that they received from their people. So imagine my surprise when the votes came back 31 yeses, 1 no, and 1 abstention. It was at that moment that I realized what an unrealistic view I had of success and failure. And as I've helped leaders to grow and develop through the years, I've seen that most people are in the same boat. In Leadership magazine, J. Wallace Hamilton states, "Failure is far more common than success. Poverty is more prevalent than wealth, and disappointment more normal than arrival." Right now, you're getting the chance to sign up with me for a class you never got a chance to take in school, one on failure. Because in life, the question is not if you will have problems, but how you're going to deal with your problems. Are you going to fail forward or backward? When I think of people who were able to look trouble in the eye and forge ahead, one of the first who comes to my mind is Mary Kay Ash. I admire Mary Kay. She overcame a lot of obstacles in her career, and she never let failure get the better of her. Mary Kay's first career was in direct sales, and she was quite successful. But she also found that it was difficult for a woman to progress in a corporate world, especially in the 1950s and early 1960s. So after 25 years of success, she decided to retire. But that didn't last long. By the time a month passed, she was stir-crazy. She was ready to start her own business. She decided on a cosmetic business that would give every woman who worked in it unlimited opportunities. She purchased the formulas to the best beauty products she ever found, worked up a marketing plan, and prepared to set up her corporation. It didn't take long for her to hit her first obstacle. When she visited her attorney to set up her corporation, he insulted her and predicted her failure. She got similar treatment from her accountant. Despite their attempts to discourage her, she moved ahead. She sank her $5,000 life savings into her new business. She put her husband to work on the administrative side of things as she worked feverishly to prepare the product, design the packaging, write the training, and recruit consultants. But then a month before she was open for business, her husband died of a heart attack right at their kitchen table. Most people would never have been able to go on after that. But not Mary Kay. She kept going, and on September 13, 1963, she launched her business. Today, the company has over $1 billion in annual sales, employs 3,500 people, and empowers 500,000 direct sales consultants in 29 markets worldwide. Despite circumstances, obstacles, and hardship, Mary Kay Ash failed forward. I don't know what kind of obstacles you're facing in your life right now, but whatever they are, it doesn't matter. What does matter is that your life can change if you're willing to look at failure differently. You have the potential to overcome any problems, mistakes, or misfortunes. All you have to do is learn to fail forward. If you are ready to do that, let's begin right now. Step 1 in failing forward is to realize there is one major difference between average people and achieving people. Chapter 2. Get a new definition of failure and success. On August 6, 1999, a Major League Baseball player stepped up to home plate in Montreal and made another out, the 5,113th one of his professional career. If a player were to make all of those outs consecutively, he would play 8 seasons without ever reaching first base. Was the player discouraged that night? No. You see, earlier in the same game, that player had reached a milestone that only 21 other people in the history of baseball have ever achieved. He had made his 3,000th hit. That player was Tony Gwynn of the San Diego Padres. During that game, Tony got on base with hits 4 times in 5 tries, but that's not the norm for him. Usually he fails to get a hit 2 times out of every 3 attempts. Those results may not sound very encouraging, but if you know baseball, you recognize that Tony's ability to succeed consistently only 1 time in 3 tries has made him the greatest hitter of his generation. And Tony recognizes that to get your hits, you've got to make a lot of outs. One of the greatest problems people have with failure is that they are too quick to judge isolated situations in their lives and label them as failures. Instead, they need to keep the bigger picture in mind. Someone like Tony Gwynn doesn't look at an out that he makes and think of failure. He sees it within the context of the bigger picture. His perspective leads to perseverance. His perseverance brings longevity, and his longevity gives him opportunities for success. If you can change your perspective on failure, it will help you to persevere and ultimately achieve your desires. So how should you judge failure? Let's start by taking a look at 7 things failure is not. Number 1, people think failure is avoidable. It's not. You've heard the saying, to err is human, to forgive divine. Alexander Pope wrote that over 250 years ago, and he was only paraphrasing a saying that was common 2,000 years ago during the time of the Romans. Things today are the same as they were then. If you're a human being, you're going to make mistakes. Number 2, people think failure is an event. It's not. Growing up, I thought that success and failure came in a moment. The best example I can think of is taking a test. If you got an F, it meant you failed. But I've come to realize that failure is a process. If you flunk a test, it doesn't mean you just failed a one-time event. The F shows that you neglected the process leading up to the test. In 1997, I wrote a book called The Success Journey. The thesis of the book is that success is not a destination, not a place where you arrive one day. Instead, it is the journey you take. And whether or not you succeed comes from what you do day to day. In other words, success is a process. Failure works the same way. It's not some place you arrive. It's how you deal with life along the way. Truly, no one can conclude that he's failed until he breathes his last breath. Until then, he's still in process, and the jury is still out. Number 3, people think failure is objective. It's not. When you err, what determines whether that action was a failure? The real answer is that you are the only person who can really label what you do a failure. It's subjective. Your perception of and response to your mistakes determine whether your actions are a failure. Number 4, people think failure is the enemy. It's not. Most people try to avoid failure like a plague. But it takes adversity to create success. NBA coach Rick Pitino states it even more strongly. Failure is good, he says. It's fertilizer. Everything I've learned about coaching, I've learned from making mistakes. Number 5, people think failure is irreversible. It's not. There's an old saying in Texas, it doesn't matter how much milk you spill as long as you don't lose your cow. In other words, mistakes are not irreversible. The problems come when you see only the spilled milk and not the bigger picture. People who see failure correctly take it in stride. Number 6, people think failure is a stigma. It's not. Mistakes are not permanent markers. I love the perspective of Senator Sam Ervin Jr. He remarked, defeat may serve as well as victory to shake the soul and let the glory out. That's the way we need to look at failure. When you make mistakes, don't let them get you down, and don't let yourself think of them as a stigma. Make each failure a step to success. Number 7, people think failure is final. It's not. Even what may appear to be a huge failure doesn't need to keep you from achieving. Take a look at the story of Sergio Zyman. Zyman, who successfully introduced Diet Coke, was also the same person who introduced New Coke. That move was an abysmal failure that lasted 79 days and cost the company about $100 million. People hated New Coke, and it caused Zyman to have to leave the company. But Zyman's problems with New Coke didn't keep him down. Eventually, the return of Coca-Cola Classic made the company even stronger, and in 1993, Zyman was hired back to the company. If you tend to focus on the extremes of success and failure, and to fixate on particular events in your life, try to put things into perspective. When you do, you'll be able to share the philosophy of someone like the Apostle Paul, who was able to say, I have learned in whatever state I am to be content. And that was saying a lot, considering that Paul was shipwrecked, whipped, beaten, stoned, and imprisoned. Throughout everything, his faith enabled him to maintain perspective. The terrible truth is that all roads to achievement lead through the land of failure. It has stood firmly between every human being who had a dream and the realization of that dream. The trouble many people have is that they believe the process is supposed to be easy. The great American inventor Thomas Edison observed that attitude among people. He said, failure is really a matter of conceit. People don't work hard because they imagine they'll succeed without ever making an effort. Most people believe that they'll wake up someday and find themselves rich. Actually, they've got it half right, because eventually they do wake up. Each of us has to make a choice. Are we going to sleep life away, avoiding failure at all cost? Or are we going to wake up and realize that failure is simply a price we pay to achieve success? If we learn to embrace that new definition of failure, then we are free to start moving ahead. Again, it's so important, let me repeat it. Failure is simply a price we pay to achieve success. And if we learn to embrace that new definition of failure, then we are free to start moving ahead. Recently, I had dinner with Truett Cathy, the founder of Chick-fil-A restaurant chain, and his story is a great illustration of the price someone paid to achieve success. Like many young men of his era, Truett went into the Army. When he was discharged in 1945, he was ready to pursue opportunity. What appealed to him was a restaurant, and his dream was to work with Ben, one of his brothers. After learning a little about the business, they scraped together some money, located a site, and built and opened a restaurant. But it wouldn't be long before Truett faced the first of several major setbacks. The first came early, only 3 years after opening the restaurant. Truett's two brothers were in a small private plane that crashed on the way to Chattanooga, Tennessee. Both of them died. Truett was devastated. Once he got over the emotional shock, he went on alone. 2 years later, he opened a second restaurant. By then, things were going pretty well. Then one night he received a phone call that woke him, telling him there was a fire at his second restaurant location. He dashed off to see what could be done, but when he arrived, he discovered that the fire had totally destroyed the operation. Worse was the fact that he had practically no insurance. It wasn't but a few weeks later that Truett faced another debilitating setback. He discovered that he had polyps in his colon that would have to be removed. The timing couldn't be worse. Instead of rebuilding his restaurant, he went in for surgery. One operation turned into two, and much to his dismay, he was out of action for several months. But the time Truett spent out of commission inspired him to begin playing with a new concept. What would happen, he wondered, if he took the chicken breast which he had been selling in his restaurants, seasoned and fried it just right, and put it on a bun with the right condiments? The answer became the Chick-fil-A sandwich, and the start of one of the largest privately owned restaurant chains in the world. Today, Truett Cathy is credited with inventing the chicken sandwich in the fast food industry, and Chick-fil-A operates over 900 restaurants across the country. In the year 2000, it became a billion-dollar company. Yet it never would have come to pass if Truett Cathy had not experienced the setbacks he did, maintained his perspective, and realized that a few negative experiences don't make for failure. If you can change the way you see failure, you gain the strength to keep running the race. Get a new definition of failure. See it as the price you pay for progress. If you can do that, you will put yourself in a much better position to fail forward. Step number 2 to failing forward: learn a new definition of failure. Chapter 3. If you failed, are you a failure? In an interview years ago, advice columnist Ann Landers was asked by David Brinkley what question she is most frequently asked by readers. Her answer: what's wrong with me? Landers' response reveals a lot about human nature. Many people wrestle with feelings of failure, the most damaging being doubtful thoughts about themselves. At the heart of those doubts and feelings is one central question: am I a failure? And that's a problem, because I believe it's nearly impossible for any person to believe he or she is a failure and fail forward at the same time. The late Irma Bombeck, who wrote a widely syndicated weekly humor column until her death in 1996, had a great perspective on what it meant to fail forward without taking failure too personally. Irma Bombeck traveled a road in life that was filled with adversity, starting with her career. Her first job was as a copy girl at the Dayton Journal-Herald when she was a teenager. But when she went off to college, a guidance counselor advised her to forget about writing. She refused. Later, she transferred to the University of Dayton, and in 1949 graduated with a degree in English. Soon afterwards, she began working as a writer for the obituary column and the Woman's Page. In 1964, Bombeck was able to convince the editor of a small neighborhood newspaper to let her write a weekly humor column, and that opened a door for her. By 1967, her column was syndicated and carried by over 900 newspapers. For just over 30 years, Irma Bombeck wrote her humor column. During that time, she published 15 books, received 15 honorary degrees, and was recognized as one of the 25 most influential women in America. But during that span of time, she also experienced incredible trials, including infertility, breast cancer, a mastectomy, the death of 2 children, and kidney failure. But she wasn't shy about sharing her perspective on her life experiences. She said, "What you have to tell yourself is, I'm not a failure. I failed at doing something." Now there's a big difference. Personally and career-wise, it's been a corduroy road. I've buried babies, lost parents, had cancer, and worried over kids. The trick is to put it all in perspective, and that's what I do for a living. That point of view kept Irma Bombeck going and writing through all the disappointments and pain. Every successful person is someone who failed yet never looked at himself as a failure. For example, Wolfgang Mozart was told by Emperor Ferdinand that his opera, The Marriage of Figaro, was far too noisy and contained far too many notes. Vincent van Gogh sold only 1 painting in his lifetime. Thomas Edison was considered unteachable, and Albert Einstein was told by a Munich schoolmaster that he would never amount to much. I think it's safe to say that all great achievers are given multiple reasons to believe they were failures. But in spite of that, they persevere. In the face of adversity, rejection, and failure, they continue believing in themselves and refuse to look at themselves as failures. There are 7 abilities achievers possess that enable them to fail, not take it personally, and keep moving forward. Number 1, achievers reject rejection. People don't give up trying because they don't base their self-worth on their performance. Instead, they have an internally based self-image. Rather than saying, "I am a failure," they say, "I missed that one," or "I made a mistake." To keep the right perspective, take responsibility for your actions, but don't take failure personally. Number 2, achievers see failure as temporary. For example, take the case of United States President Harry S. Truman. In 1922, he was 38 years old, in debt, and out of work. In 1945, he was the most powerful leader of the free world, occupying the highest office in the land. If he had seen failure as permanent, he would have remained stuck and never would have kept trying and believing in his potential. Number 3, achievers see failures as isolated incidents. When achievers fail, they see it as a momentary event, not a lifelong epidemic. It's not personal. So if you want to succeed, don't let any one incident color your view of yourself. Number 4, achievers keep expectations realistic. Something that happened on baseball's opening day in 1954 illustrates this point well. The Milwaukee Braves and the Cincinnati Reds played one another, and a rookie for each team made their major league debuts during that game. The rookie who played for the Reds hit 4 doubles and helped his team win with a score of 9-8. The rookie for the Braves went 0 for 5. The Reds player was Jim Greengrass, a name that you may never have heard. The other guy, who didn't get a hit, might be more familiar to you. His name was Hank Aaron. If Aaron's expectations for that first game had been unrealistic, who knows? He might have given up baseball. Surely he wasn't happy about his performance that day, but he didn't think of himself as a failure. He wasn't about to give up easily. Number 5, achievers focus on strengths. Another way achievers keep themselves from personalizing failure is by focusing on their strengths. Bob Butera, president of the New Jersey Devils hockey team, was asked what makes a winner. He answered that what distinguishes winners from losers is that winners concentrate at all times on what they can do, not on what they can't do. If a weakness is a matter of character, it needs much attention. Focus on it until you shore it up. Otherwise, The best bet for failing forward is to develop and maximize your strengths. Number 6. Achievers vary approaches to achievement. In The Psychology of Achievement, Brian Tracy writes about 4 millionaires who made their fortunes by age 35. They were involved in an average of 17 businesses before finding that one that took them to the top. They kept trying and changing until they found something that worked for them. Achievers are willing to vary their approaches to problems. Number 7. Achievers bounce back. Psychologist Simone Carruthers says life is a series of outcomes. Sometimes the outcome is what you want. Great. Figure out what you did right. Sometimes the outcome is what you don't want. Great. Figure out what you did wrong so that you don't do it again. That's the key to bouncing back. That's the way to take yourself out of failure. One of the best stories I've ever heard of someone who refused to take failure personally is that of Daniel Rudiger. You may have seen the film which was based on his life called Rudy. The first of 14 children in a poor working-class family, Rudy loved football as a kid and believed that might be his ticket out of Joliet, Illinois. But his heart was much greater than his physique. He was slow, and at 5 feet 6 inches tall and 190 pounds, he wasn't exactly built for the game. As a senior, he began dreaming about attending Notre Dame and playing football there. But Rudy faced another problem. His grades showed less promise even than his physique. And for the next several years, Rudy changed his focus from one thing to another. He was more determined than ever to go to Notre Dame despite the criticism of his family, friends, and co-workers. He knew that he was not a failure, and he would find a way to go to South Bend. Eventually, Rudy quit his job, moved to South Bend, and managed to get into Holy Cross College, a community college affiliated with the university. He attended the college for 2 years and earned a 4-point average every semester before Notre Dame accepted him. He entered his dream school at age 26, 8 years after graduating from high school. With 2 years of sports eligibility remaining, he went out for football. He made the team as a scrub, one of the warm bodies that they put in practice to keep the good players sharp. But Rudy worked hard anyway. And in the final game of his final season, Rudy got to live his dream by getting into a game as a player. In the movie, Rudy Rudiger gets in for only one play at the end of the game. But that's not how it really happened. In real life, he had 2 chances to get the quarterback. The first play, he was too anxious and didn't execute the play. He failed. But once again, Rudy didn't let his failure make him a failure. He was determined to fail forward. When they snapped the ball the second time, he put the moves he'd rehearsed in his mind on the guy over him, and he sacked the quarterback. Overjoyed, the team carried him off the field in celebration. Rudy says it's the only time that has happened to a player in the history of Notre Dame football. The great thing about Rudy's story is that he doesn't have the athletic ability of Michael Jordan, nor is he a genius like Mozart, Van Gogh, Edison, or Einstein. He's just a regular person like you and me. The only reason he's an achiever instead of average is that he refused to let failure get the better of him. He learned that no matter how many times you fail, it doesn't have to make you a failure. Step number 3 to failing forward: remove the you from failure. Chapter 4. You're too old to cry, but it hurts too much to laugh. Just about everyone has heard of the Wright brothers. But what you may not know is that the Wrights, unknown with no university education, were not the leaders in aviation. They were obscure at best, and another man was expected to put the first manned airplane into the air. His name was Dr. Samuel Langley, an accomplished thinker, scientist, and inventor. He had published several important works on aerodynamics, and he possessed a vision for achieving manned flight. In 1898, he approached the United States War Department for funding to design and build an airplane to carry a man aloft, and they gave him a commission of $50,000, a huge sum at that time. His success seemed inevitable. On October the 8th, 1903, Langley expected his years of work to come to fruition. As journalists and curious onlookers watched, Charles Manley, the engineer who built the plane's engine, strode across the deck of a modified houseboat and climbed into the pilot's seat of a craft called the Great Aerodrome. The full-size motorized device was perched atop a specially built catapult designed to initiate the aerodrome flight into the air. But when they attempted the launch, part of the aerodrome got caught, and the biplane was flung into 16 feet of water a mere 50 yards away from the boat. At first, Langley didn't let that failure or the accompanying criticism deter him. 8 weeks later, in early December, he and Manley were ready to attempt the flight again. They had made numerous modifications to the aerodrome, and once more Manley climbed in the cockpit from the houseboat's deck, ready to make history. But as before, disaster struck. This time the cable supports to the wing snapped as the plane was launched. The craft caught again on the launch rail, and it plunged into the river upside down. Manley nearly died. Langley said afterward, "I have brought to a close the portion of the work which seemed to be specifically mine." In other words, Langley had given up. Just 2 weeks later, Orville and Wilbur Wright, uneducated, unknown, and unfunded, flew their plane Kitty Hawk over the sand dunes of North Carolina. What happened in the life of Samuel Langley occurs in the lives of many people today. They allow failure to get the better of them emotionally, and it stops them from achieving their dreams. Let's face it, failure can be very painful, sometimes physically and more often emotionally. Seeing part of your vision fall flat really hurts, and if people heap ridicule on top of your own hurt feelings, you feel even worse. For many people, the pain of failure leads to fear of failure, and if fear overcomes you, it's almost impossible to fail forward. The inaction that results when people are stopped by fear takes on many forms. Here are the 3 most common ones I've observed. Number 1, paralysis. Some people simply stop trying to do anything that might lead to failure. President Harry S. Truman said, "The worst danger we face is the danger of being paralyzed by doubts and fears. People whose fear paralyzes them give up any hope of moving forward." Number 2, procrastination. Other people maintain the hope of progress but simply never get around to following through. Procrastination steals a person's time, productivity, and potential. As President John F. Kennedy said, "There are risks and costs to a program of action, but they are far less than the long-range risk and cost of comfortable inaction." Procrastination is too high a price to pay for fear of failure. Number 3, purposelessness. Tom Peters, co-author of In Search of Excellence, says there's nothing more useless than someone who comes to the end of the day and congratulates himself saying, "Well, I made it through the day without screwing up." Yet that's what many people who fear failure do. Rather than pursuing worthy objectives, they avoid the pain of making mistakes. And in the midst of that transition, they lose sight of any sense of purpose that they might have once possessed. As fear of failure and the resulting inactivity compounds, people exhibit additional negative side effects like self-pity, excuses, misused energy, and feelings of hopelessness. Many people are unable to overcome their fear because they focus on the wrong thing. They believe that what started their cycle of fear is the thing they should avoid to end it. But the problem is, you can't avoid fear, and you can't wait for motivation to get you going. To conquer fear, you have to feel the fear and take action anyway. Playwright George Bernard Shaw said, "A life spent in making mistakes is not only more honorable but more useful than a life spent doing nothing." To overcome fear, you have to be willing to know that much of your life will be spent making mistakes. The bad news is that if you've been inactive for a long time, getting started is hard to do. The good news is that as soon as you start moving, it gets easier. If you can get going and keep making mistakes, you gain experience. That experience eventually brings competence. And eventually, you will also make fewer mistakes. And as a result, your fear will become less paralyzing. But the whole process starts with action. To get over fear, you've got to get started. Many unsuccessful people get paralyzed by fear. But the same thing also happens to high achievers. For example, when you look at the life of one of the great composers, George Frederick Handel, you see a successful person who found himself in a rut that he desperately needed to break out of. Handel was a musical prodigy, but despite Handel's talent and fame, he faced considerable adversity. Competition with rival English composers was fierce. Audiences were fickle and sometimes didn't turn out for his performances, and he was frequently the victim of the changing political winds of the time. Several times he found himself penniless and on the verge of bankruptcy, and the pain and rejection of failure was difficult. Then his problems were compounded by failing health. He suffered a stroke which left his right arm limp and caused him to lose the use of 4 fingers on his right hand. Though he recovered, it left him despondent. Finally, in 1741, at only 56 years old, Handel decided that it was time to retire. He was discouraged, miserable, and consumed with debt. So on April 8, he gave what he considered his farewell concert. Disappointed and filled with self-pity, he gave up. But in August of that year, something incredible happened. A wealthy friend named Charles Jennings visited Handel and gave him a libretto based on the life of Christ. The work intrigued Handel enough to stir him to action. He began writing, and immediately the floodgates of inspiration opened in him. His cycle of inactivity was broken. For 21 days he wrote almost nonstop. Then he spent another 2 days creating the orchestration. In 24 days he had completed the 260-page manuscript. He called the piece Messiah. When it comes to getting over the emotional hurts of failure, it really doesn't matter how good or bad your personal history is. The only thing that matters is that you face your fear and get moving. Do that, and you give yourself the opportunity to learn how to fail forward. Step number 4 to failing forward: take action and reduce your fear. Chapter 5. Find the exit off of the failure freeway. Business professors Gary Hamel and C.K. Prahalad have written about an experiment that was conducted with a group of monkeys. It's a great story of failure. They say that 4 monkeys were placed in a room that had a tall pole in the center of it. Suspended from the top of that pole was a bunch of bananas. One of the hungry monkeys started climbing the pole to get something to eat. But just as he reached out to grab a banana, he was doused with a torrent of cold water. Squealing, he scampered down the pole and abandoned his attempt to feed himself. Each monkey made a similar attempt, and each one was drenched with cold water. After making several attempts, they finally gave up. Then researchers removed one of the monkeys from the room and replaced him with a new monkey. As the newcomer began to climb the pole, the other 3 grabbed him and pulled him down to the ground. After trying to climb the pole several times and being dragged down by the others, he finally gave up and never attempted to climb the pole again. One by one, the researchers replaced the original monkeys with the new ones, and each time a new monkey was brought in, he would be dragged down by the others before he could reach the bananas. In time, the room was filled with monkeys who had never received a cold shower. None of them would climb the pole, but none of them knew why. Unfortunately, people who have gotten used to failure can be a lot like those monkeys. They make the same mistakes over and over, yet they are never quite sure of why, and as a result, they never seem to get off of what I call the failure freeway. The old saying is true: if you always do what you've always done, then you will always get what you've always gotten.